Okay, this is our update on the broader markets. We'll start with TLT so this will be a combination of TLT, SPX, QQQ, and IWM because they're all very correlated. It's important to know where TLT is going. Reminder: TLT tracks the long-term bonds, very highly correlated with the 10-year yield, and so we suspected that this made a daily cycle low on May 9th, and I'll post a link to the video that is specific to TLT, like the previous one. This again is going to be amalgamation that's going to include, the broader indices and TLT. So we are now on day 12. So we technically had a high yesterday, so day 11, May 24th, and we did not make a new high today on May 25th, day 12. And so this could be the start of the rollover of the daily cycle, because this is like, as daily cycles go, day 12 is not super early. And so the fact that we made a new high on day 11 is definitely interesting. And so you wouldn't expect it to go too much higher. Structurally, you see this as your terminal point, 123.27. That's kind of your breakout. Why? Because that's your last lower high, right? Like, this is your bear flag, right? If you like, this area was, we tried to rally and then we failed, and then we made that new low. So if we can get through there, that would be very bullish. And looking on the weekly chart, this is basically confirmed a weekly cycle low. Now, there are still a couple days left, so things could change, but I mean, it depends on how you draw this trend line, right? Like, and that's the tough part, where I don't know that the trend line is like the end all be all, but we're now making a weekly, we're now making a weekly swing low, which is an indication of a potential weekly cycle low. We're trying to creep up to the 10-week moving average, which is in that 120, 150 area. So might expect that to be some resistance. That's still about $1, actually about $2 from here. But this looks like a long-term bottom, and I'll show you what looks even more like a long-term bottom, and it's this monthly chart. Let's zoom in here. So remember, these are your yearly cycles, and they're measured in months. So the previous yearly cycle was 15 months. It bottomed on March 21st, right, of last year, March 21st, 2021. And then we started this new yearly cycle, which had a top on month 9, which was December. So right in between when QQQs topped out and when SPX topped out. And then we just dropped for the last 5 months. Really steep decline. I still suspect that this is going to create a higher low and then a rollover to new lows. But this is a green month. Remember, go back and look at that last video. That was a red candle. This has gone from green to red. We were all the way down here and we made it all the way back up here. This is very bullish, especially as we start to enter June. We still have, a few days to close out, but this sets up a monthly swing low, right? Once we can go above the high from this month, structurally, like, think about that, right? Once we get above here, and the month isn't closed out yet, so we'll have to see where the high nets out. But that gives us a new high on the monthly chart. Like, when was the last time we had a new high on the monthly chart? Not this month, right? That didn't make a new high. It wasn't this month. We almost got one. Not this month. Not that month. This is your month that you made the last new high, and you failed. It was a failed breakout. So if TLT is bottoming, that's a really important sign for the broader markets. And so we'll switch to that now, looking at SPX. So this is important. This is where, you start to talk about the idiosyncrasies of cycles and, how much do you adhere to this versus that. This is where I think price action analysis really shines. It's not about cycles. It's about price action analysis, and cycles may help us understand the price action a little better. So that whole rant was to set this whole idea up, right? So I just added back the 10 period moving average. This is your daily chart of SPX, the S&P 500. So we did close above the 10 period moving average on that day 3 high. That makes me think, and it's not about necessarily closing above the 10 period moving average. It's more that we had this huge move, right? This cycle lasted 54 trading days. So, right, it started on February 24th and it ended on May 12th. That's a really long time. So it makes sense that this sort of rally, or I should say impulse retracement cycle had ended, and we're now starting a new one, which so far has a top on day 3. Now that would be really bearish, right? Because it would mean that we've already made a new low below the previous daily cycle low, right? So that would have happened on day 4, 5, 6, right? And we're now on day 9. What would have to happen to think that this interpretation is wrong? It's really clear. We need to make a high above this day 3 high. That's all. That's at 40.9072 for the SPX cash. Not the futures. The numbers are slightly different there. But that's what we need to do. Now, to like really zoom in so you understand what's happening with the price action, you have pretty clear risk levels here, right? Like you could put your stop, I would actually say somewhere like right there, right? So at the 39.14 level. So that's like a 64 point stop for, potentially, if you can clear this, you'd probably overshoot to 4,100. So that gives you 100, 120 points. So a 2-to-1, not the best trade odds, I would say. I'd actually zoom into a lower time frame to see if there are better kind of risk rewards. I don't generally go too low on time frames, but I'll go out to the weekly chart to show. I think this is bearish, right? Again, if it makes a move above here and is able to back test it from above and keep moving, right? So we would need to see something like that. Not obviously, it doesn't have to be exactly this, but something like that, right? Is what we would, right? Like, okay, we're making our move back to new highs. I doubt that that's what's happening here. And I'll look at, when you look at the weekly chart, it kind of gives you a sense of why that might be the case. So this is week 13. It's handedly an inside week, right? We would need to make a low below this the low that we just made at 38.14 or a high above 40.82 to get out of this range. And so we're probably going to close the week inside this range, and we'll probably open the next week inside this range, right? So it'll be 2 weeks inside this big week's range, which is to be clear, again, details are important. This was a bearish outside weekly candle, meaning we made a new high above this week's candle, so it faked you out. It made you think that we had a weekly swing low, because we did have a weekly swing low at that point, right? At the point where this made a high above here, this was a weekly swing low, and then it just proceeded to fail. Now we're getting consolidation inside this range, I suspect setting up more downside. The other reason, we're on week 13. Look at these weekly cycles. Previous one ended on week 20, previous one 31, previous 24, previous 27. We generally don't have weekly cycles that end around week 12, because that's what that would mean, right? That if this low holds, it's essentially a 12-week cycle. It could certainly happen. Price action is price action. But what this price action suggests, this huge move lower, this is your lower low, right? This big move down is a low below all these lows. And so you would expect we'd make a lower high, maybe come all the way up here, 4164, 4150. That seems like the area this rally may terminate at, right? But there's no way to know for sure. We're gonna watch it closely. But that's how you gauge price action and understand sort of risk reward. Right now, the risk reward is to the downside, I would say. And QQQ is looking so much worse. Same situation, day 3 high, currently day 9. We've already undercut the previous daily cycle low. I mean, this looks so incredibly weak. So to be clear, this is a daily swing low, right? Once we went above this high. But we're still inside the range of this big down candle. This does not look good. And for QQQ, this is week 10 as opposed to week 13 for SPY. But same principle. This huge move down needs some rest, right? Some consolidation. But that's only to set up the next leg lower, is what I suspect is going to happen. And IWM finally. So not to sound like a broken record, but it's the same count on the daily cycle in that it's day 9. We've had a top on day 3. We have a high on day 3. Again, all we need to do is get above the day 3 high. In the case of IWM, that's around in the 183 range, if you want to call it. And on the weekly level, so IWM, it's important to note the previous weekly cycle was actually 31 weeks. So it was very long, right? So we could have a short weekly cycle this week, or excuse me, this weekly cycle to balance it out. The weekly cycle before last, and it was 20 weeks, and the one before that, 22, before that, 28. So you could see a world where, this downdraft ends in like 4, or like maybe call it 6 to 7 weeks, right? Maybe we get a 20-week cycle. But same picture as, sorry, I'll move that. Same picture as the other indices. For the most part, it's an inside week. We have had a pretty furious rally. So again, I would watch that 182.69 level. Maybe we get there by the end of the week. Who knows? But I'd say the broader point is that more downside awaits is my suspicion. And as I reiterate, I think we're going to see we're more likely to see a low in, call it, mid-July.